Disclaimer. The story you're about to hear recounts a crime of unspeakable violence. It includes graphic descriptions that may be distressing to some listeners. This podcast is dedicated to the memory of the families who never got to see another sunrise. May their names never fade and their stories never be forgotten. From the Chanute Daily Tribune, published June 10th, 1912. Headline quote, "The Axeman at it again. 8 people found murdered in their beds. An entire family and 2 guests wiped out." End quote. It has been 112 years since the most brutal mass murder in Iowa's history had occurred. At the time, it was one of the most baffling crimes ever committed, and to this day, it remains just as perplexing. This is the first case we will examine, done by the transient axe murderer who rode the rails across the Midwest in the early 1910s. Ladies and gentlemen, join me today as we dive into the Villisca axe murders of 1912. On June 9th, 1912, the small farming town of Villisca, Iowa, held its annual Summer Children's Day service at the local Presbyterian church. The program ran from about 8 p.m. until 9:30 p.m., drawing many residents to the festivities. Though it now carries a darker association, Villisca, located roughly 80 to 90 miles southwest of Des Moines, was once known primarily as a thriving railroad town with a population of nearly 2,500. Among its residents was a family of 6. Husband and father, Josiah, who went by Joe Moore, age 43, his wife Sarah Montgomery Moore, age 39, and their 4 children, Herman Moore, age 11, Mary Catherine Moore, age 10, Arthur Boyd Moore, age 7, and Paul Vernon Moore, age 5. The Moores were a well-loved and admired family, known for their generosity and involvement within the community. Josiah owned his own implement business, the J.B. Moore Implement Company, which made them more financially stable than most families in town. The Children's Day service was a perfect example of how the Moores actively supported local events. Sarah Moore helped organize rehearsals for the children's performances, which had been eagerly anticipated. That evening, Mary Catherine invited 2 friends to stay the night, sisters Lena Stillinger, age 12, and Ina Stillinger, age 8. These 2 sisters would also be participating in the services. Originally, Lena and Ina planned to return to their grandmother's house after the event, but as the evening progressed, they became uneasy about the idea of walking alone in the dark. This fear was likely intensified by the town's decision to cut power to its street lamps that night due to a local dispute with the town council, making the streets even darker than usual. Concerned for their safety, Joe Moore called the Stillinger home and received permission for them to stay overnight at their house instead. The Moore family and the Stillinger sisters then walked together to the church for the 8 p.m. service. It went off without a hitch. Children sang their gospel songs, and proud parents looked on from the pews. By 9:30 p.m., laughter and friendly chatter filled the streets as families made their way home, unaware that this would be the last time anyone would see the Moore family and the 2 Stillinger sisters alive. At around 4:30 a.m. the next morning, the Moores' next-door neighbor, Mary Peckham, began her morning duties at home like any other Monday. As she was hanging laundry in her yard at around 6 a.m., she started taking note of something feeling off. The Moore household was eerily silent. The family was always up by then. Children doing their morning chores, Sarah cooking breakfast, and Joe preparing for work. Thinking they had simply slept in after a long Sunday, Mary let the Moores' chickens out of their coops and returned to her tasks. By 7:30 a.m., however, her unease grew. The house remained unnervingly quiet, with no movement inside. Unable to shake her concern, Mary Peckham decided to call Joe's brother, Ross Moore, who owned a pharmacy near the Moore family's business. Ross, too, found the silence unusual and told Mary he would come over with a spare key to check on them. Before heading to the Moore house, Ross stopped at Josiah's store to see if his brother had arrived at work unnoticed. He hadn't. With concern growing, Ross asked one of Josiah's employees, Ed Epperly, to accompany him to the Moore residence. By 8:15 a.m., Ross and Ed arrived to the small white house located at 508 East 2nd Street, where Mary Peckham anxiously waited. The three of them circled the house, knocking on windows and calling out to the family, but there was no response. More disturbing, all the windows had their shades drawn or were covered with clothing. With dread creeping in, Ross pulled out his spare key and unlocked the parlor room door. Nothing could have prepared him for what he was about to uncover. Ross cautiously stepped inside, his eyes struggling to adjust to the darkness. As he slowly moved through the parlor, he hesitated at the first bedroom door. When he pushed it open, he was met with a sight that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He could make out the shadow of two figures lying in bed, both being bludgeoned beyond comprehension. Staggering backwards in shock, Ross stumbled out onto the porch, collapsing onto the steps. Barely able to form the words, he turned to Mary Peckham and muttered, "Get the town marshal." It was Ed Epperly who ran to find the town marshal, Hank Horton, who was on Main Street at the time. When he found him, he breathlessly relayed the grim discovery. Without hesitation, Horton abandoned his daily tasks and rushed toward the Moore residence. When Horton arrived, he found Ross Moore sitting on the porch, pale and shaken. "What seems to be the trouble, Ross?" he asked. Looking up into Hank's eyes, Ross responded, "I'm afraid something awful has happened in there. I want you to go inside and see." Horton struck a match from his jacket pocket, the faint glow casting eerie shadows against the walls as he stepped inside. Following in his footsteps was Ed Epperly, who, despite his mounting dread, could not resist the urge to see for himself. The first bedroom confirmed their worst fears. Two victims, covered in bedclothes, their heads crushed beyond recognition. Then something even more disturbing. One of the bodies, positioned in an unnatural way, as if the killer had staged it for some grotesque pleasure. Horton lifted the shades of the north window, allowing daylight to illuminate the horrors of the room. A blood-stained axe leaned against the south wall. An oil lamp sat right next to the murder weapon on the floor, its chimney removed and oddly placed beneath a dresser. Two Bibles rested on top of the dresser, one labeled to Lena and the other to Ina. It was now clear who the two victims were. Unable to stomach what he had seen, Ed Epperly fled the house, leaving Marshal Horton to continue all alone. Hank retraced his steps back through the parlor before turning into the kitchen. There, a wooden basin filled with bloody water sat on the counter, evidence that the killer had likely washed his hands before leaving the scene. His heart pounded as he approached the narrow staircase leading upstairs from the kitchen. Clothes hung from the railings, making the already tight passage even more claustrophobic. Each step creaked beneath his weight as he ascended, knowing that whatever awaited him at the top would only add to the nightmare that was unfolding before him. Upon reaching the top of the stairs, Hank found himself in the bedroom of Joe and Sarah Moore. The house had no hallways on the second floor, just a direct entry into the rooms. He reached out and pulled up the shades of the north bedroom window, allowing daylight to illuminate the horror before him. In the northwest corner of the room, Joe and Sarah Moore lay side by side in bed, their bodies undisturbed, but their heads covered with cloth. Their faces had been bludgeoned beyond recognition. Hank noted that the killer appeared to unleash extra fury on the parents, likely because they were the only ones capable of stopping him. Blood splattered the bedstead and streaked the walls surrounding the bed. Despite the sheer brutality of the attack, both Joe and Sarah showed no signs of struggle, leading investigators to believe that they had been murdered in their sleep, never even waking before the fatal blows fell. Now, in terms of Sarah Moore, I disagree. She is the only victim of the 8 whom I believe might have awoken during the attack, but we will talk about my reasons as to why I feel this way during the discussion part of the episode. Horton continued into the bedroom adjacent to Joe and Sarah's, where he discovered 4 more victims. Scattered toys littered the floor, as if the children had been playing before bed, unaware of the horror that would soon unfold. Deep axe marks marred the ceiling, a chilling testament to the frenzied brutality of the attack. In the northeast corner of the room, Herman Moore lay face down, a cloth covering his face. In the southwest corner, Catherine Moore rested on a small sofa, her face also concealed beneath a piece of cloth. In the small bed across the room, Boyd and Paul Moore lay side by side, their faces similarly covered. Their young, fragile skulls had been shattered, unable to withstand even a few blows. With his inspection complete, Hank rushed down to Ross on the front porch, delivering the news that would forever change the course of the town and the lives of those involved. "My God, Ross, there's somebody dead in every bed." After informing those gathered outside the house, Hank Horton rushed back into town to find a doctor. He enlisted Dr. Clark Cooper, who agreed to accompany him to the crime scene and examine the victims. By this point, word of the gruesome discovery was spreading like wildfire, and a growing crowd had begun gathering outside the Moore home. Dr. Cooper followed Horton into the house, beginning his examination in the downstairs bedroom where Lena and Ina Stillinger had slept. He carefully lifted their bodies to assess rigor mortis, concluding that they had been dead for approximately 8 to 9 hours, placing the time of the murders around midnight. As Cooper and Horton surveyed the room, they noted several new unsettling details. The dresser mirror on the east wall had been deliberately covered with a piece of black clothing. Then, near the foot of the bed, a slab of bacon wrapped in a dishcloth lay on the floor beside the bloodied axe, which leaned against the south wall. Further investigation revealed 2 additional disturbing finds beneath the bed. The first was Lena's undergarments, which had been removed. This detail, along with her body's unnatural position, led early investigators to suspect a sexual assault. However, a more thorough examination later determined that none of the victims had been assaulted. After taking note of all these new additional details, the 2 men then retreated back out to the parlor and made their way through the kitchen, approaching the staircase that led to the second floor. Once they ascended, Hank pulled up the remaining window shades, allowing light to spill into the darkened rooms. Meanwhile, Dr. Cooper carefully examined the bodies of the Moore family. Having already determined the estimated time of death from his assessment of the Stillinger sisters, he refrained from disturbing the victims of the Moore family. With his task complete, the young Dr. Clark Cooper concluded his inspection of all 8 victims. The entire examination had taken no more than 15 minutes, yet it had revealed a horror beyond comprehension. As he stepped onto the front porch, he was met with the sight of an impatient crowd pressing toward the house, eager to see the gruesome scene for themselves. Desperate to stop them, Cooper raised his voice in a frantic plea, saying, "Boys, my God, boys, don't come in here. You will regret it the longest day you ever live." Unfortunately, some of the residents chose not to listen to Cooper's plea. Before we move into the final part of this monologue, it's crucial to understand a key factor that hindered this case, and many others like it. In 1912, most small towns in America did not have an active police force. Crimes of this magnitude were unprecedented in rural communities, and as a result, crime scenes often became chaotic, trampled by curious locals before a proper investigation could even begin. If we assume that the Villisca crime was the work of an early serial killer, whoever this maniac was, he had a perfect method of striking and vanishing into the night. He selected towns that thrived on railroad traffic, but lacked any real law enforcement presence. His process was chilling and methodical. Arrive by train, scout the town, pick a house at random, commit the crime, and then slip onto another outbound train before the bodies were even discovered. By the time anyone realized what had happened, the crime scene was compromised, the town was in mass hysteria, and he was already miles away. No evidence, no witnesses, no trace. Now that you understand the sinister precision behind the work of a perhaps early serial killer, let's dive into the final pieces of our documentation. Fast forwarding to the final key event of June 10th, Hank Horton brought in bloodhounds from Beatrice, Nebraska, hoping to track the killer's scent. The hounds didn't arrive until 9 p.m., and by then, any chance of a reliable trail was slim. With hundreds of people having trampled through the crime scene all day, it was already a desperate attempt. The dogs were first given the axe to sniff, and they quickly set off from the front porch. Nearly 750 to 1,000 townspeople followed, some on foot, others in buggies, and even a few in early automobiles. The hounds led the crowd to the edge of the Nottoway River, where the trail abruptly ended. Refusing to give up, investigators brought the dogs back to the Moore house the following morning and gave them a different item to track. Yet again, they followed the scent straight to the riverbank before stopping. The killer's trail had gone cold. That concluded the events of June 10th. Now let's wrap up with what investigators uncovered about the possible murderer in the first week of the investigation. M.W. McClary, a fingerprint expert and special agent with the U.S. Department of Justice Bureau of Criminal Investigation in Leavenworth, Kansas, was called to Villisca to examine the crime scene for any viable fingerprints. Though his search yielded nothing usable, he conducted the most thorough forensic analysis of the house, drawing several chilling conclusions about the killer's actions and motives. McClary dismissed robbery as a motive almost instantly. Valuables and money had been left completely untouched. Instead, he believed the murderer was mentally unstable and driven by sexual impulses, with Lena Stillinger as the primary target. Her body's position and the removal of her undergarments supported this theory. Given the similarities to other axe murders that were happening right at that time across the Midwest, McClary suspected the same perpetrator was responsible for all of them. Examining the second floor, McClary noted an axe mark on the ceiling of the children's room, moving from south to north, a strong indication that the killer was left-handed. The placement of plaster dust on the floor suggested that the mark had been made in a frenzy, supporting the idea that the killer wildly swung with the axe one-handed, even scoring the ceiling in the process. Blood splatter analysis near Herman Moore's bed revealed something even more unsettling. Small droplets were found 3 feet above and behind the bed, positions inconsistent with a direct blow. Instead, McClary theorized that the blood had sprayed from the axe as the killer twirled it above his head, while transitioning from one victim to the next. Based on these details, he concluded that the murderer held a kerosene lamp in his right hand while wielding the axe with his left. Finally, before leaving the house, McClary studied the staircase leading to the second floor. It was narrow and S-shaped, with clothes hanging along the railing for storage. Given the structure of the house, he was confident that only a small man could have navigated the stairs without waking the victims. He also noted how loud the staircase was, something any visitor to the house today can still experience. If you've listened this far, you likely have many lingering questions. What happened next in the investigation? Who were the suspects? We will explore all of that in the next episode. The Villisca axe murders remain the most infamous case among the string of Midwest axe killings, and because of that, we'll dedicate one more episode to this case before stepping even further back in time, to the earliest known murder linked to this elusive killer. Okay, and before you continue to the second half of this episode, take a moment. Make sure your doors are locked and your axe is far out of strangers' reach, because you never know who could be lurking outside your home. You gotta love that. You gotta love that. That's all
Yes,
right.
indeed.
All right. So here we are. I am joined by who I like to refer to as the Michael Jordan of Villisca axe murder. The details of the crime and um, the research he's put in. I would like to welcome Dr. Ed Epperly onto the show to kick off this series. How you doing, Ed?
Just fun.
Gr-
Feel good.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And before we, dive into anything, can you so this obviously pretty known murder. How did you get started in this? How did it come about?
I had heard of it, as a child. I grew up about 100 miles from Villisca in Iowa and knew nothing about it, just that there was a big murder in Villisca sometime in the past. I was at graduate school. I had two buddies, the three of us, and we're in our last semester of BA for a BA degree, and that was at Iowa State Teachers College. At that time, we were all going to be history teachers. We're all history majors. And that was in the spring of 1956. And we had a paper assigned for an Iowa history course, and It was on a Sunday afternoon. I remember we were driving down the road outside of Cedar Falls, and what are you going to write on? No, I don't know. Nobody knew. And someone said, well, why don't we get a really an interesting topic and talk to the instructor who we knew and see if we can persuade her to let us do a joint paper where we do original research. We would try to find documents, interviews, things like that. And then we had to decide, well, what are we going to do? And we picked on the Villisca axe murder. None of us knew anything about it. And so in the spring of 1956, the three of us drove a long way. It was 200 plus miles to Villisca. We found out people that knew something about it, and one of us would go there. And then we would get together as a team and go over the notes that we had taken and tried to make sure we remembered what we'd been told. And then we wrote the paper, and I just got interested in it. And I and one of the fellows, a guy named Don Brown, who's dead now, but the two of us continued to research for about a decade. He dropped out. He went to Indiana, and it wasn't convenient to work together. And I just kept working along, and pretty soon it's been 65 years.
Yeah, no, it's quite a journey, quite an origin story. I am gonna you wrote a book recently, you released it, what was it, 2022? Early 2022?
Yeah, I think 22. Yeah, I'd
Yeah.
have to check. It came out right at the end of 21, and
Yeah, because I read it in January the first time I remember. So I'm gonna actually have that link for anyone listening in the descriptions below for all my platforms where to buy it. He does a great job explaining it, showing many historical photos, which is my favorite part of the book, of the people involved, and just a great book. So that will be in the link in the description if it suits your interest. But here we go. Let's talk about this crime, and I feel like it's important we talk about the life before it. I want to dive into especially the Children's Day service. Moors and Stillingers, they go to this service, and was this an annual
yes,
event for the
it
Presbyterian?
was. It was the end of the Sunday school year. They started Sunday school in September, kind of followed the school pattern, and ended in this case in June. Let's see, that'd be the 9th of June. And it was not unusual. A lot of churches did this. They would put together a program. The children sang hymns and read Bible verses and gave testimony, I suspect, and to kind of demonstrate what they had learned in Sunday school
Yeah,
during the
right.
year. And you had the four more children, and then two neighbor girls. They were hardly neighbors. They lived out in the country, about a mile, maybe a mile and a half from the Moors. But they were friends with Catherine, Lena, and Ina Stillinger, although some people call it Stillinger. So you had six kids there. And then Mrs. Moore, Sarah Moore, she and the pastor's wife, Mrs. Ewing, they were in charge of the program. And so that's how they spent the evening before they went home after that. So.
Yes. Okay. And how was life? You always think about this murder, how it impacted this town. It was a pretty promising future, correct? With before this all happened. I mean, this was a booming town.
Oh, sure. That was a very prosperous time in American agriculture from 1910 to 1920. Villisca was a typical agricultural community, somewhat larger than most, maybe close to 2,500 at the time of the murder.
Yeah. So, wanted to just ask that real quick, and now I want to go into there were some things I didn't mention in this monologue because I felt like it would have been better to talk about concerning stuff that happened that night outside of the house. Two little things. One being the town watchman, Hank Horton, who actually like stated earlier in the episode, he's the one that went in there and upstairs for the first time, did the first sweep of the house, and he was with his Mike Overman, another fellow in the town square. Correct?
That's correct.
Was this around 10 o'clock at night of the murders? Or
Not that late. Not that late.
okay.
It was deep dusk. I would guess at 8:30,
Okay.
Maybe 9 o'clock. That's an interesting story. Nothing came of it in the sense they didn't follow it up at the time, but it floats around in the back of your head
It does.
about this. Uh, the murder house was 1 block north of the town square. The town square at that time did not have sidewalks, but it did have cinder paths. And one of those started in the northeast corner of the square and ran to the southwest corner, an X. The other one started in
Yes.
the
Yes.
northwest corner and ran to the south. Hank Horton was the day marshal. He was on duty from morning until evening. Uh, Mike Overman, his actual name was Henry, but everyone called him Mike. He was much younger. I think he was 26 at the time.
Okay.
Hank was in his 40s. The two of them were walking from the northeast corner to the southwest corner along about 8:30, 9 o'clock. And it was dark, but not full night. There was still a little glimmer of
Yes.
light.
Yeah.
And
Right.
here came a fellow that they both recognized as a stranger. They did not know who it was. A town that size, marshals generally knew virtually everybody in
Right.
town.
Exactly.
And they didn't know who he was. They didn't describe him. He was walking kind of hurriedly to the northeast up that cinder path, which is, after all, exactly how you would walk if you were going to the murder house. You
It's
might have
yeah.
gone north and then east, or you might have gone east and then north. But either way, he was doing that. Uh, when they passed him, he had his head down and did not respond. Mike Overman said, hello,
Hello. Yeah.
and he didn't respond. And as they walked past each other, Hank said to Mike, why didn't you make him speak back? And Mike said, well, I didn't think about it. I didn't seem he wasn't doing anything wrong. And Hank said, well, I always make them speak back. I want them to talk to me. Then Hank said, well, uh, he's probably just a farmer from south of town somewhere, is going to church to pick up his girl. And that was the
Yeah. I
conversation.
mean, yeah. I mean, that's hindsight. Obviously, it's like, oh, dang. Like, but it's like, I
Yeah.
mean, I can easily see both the reasoning. That's one of the that's one of the things I look back on and just like, and the street lamps didn't add to that with them being
Yeah. Yeah.
out. I know it was still, there was. I do think it's a little bit. It was definitely still. They were pretty scattered. I would assume the street lamps. It wouldn't have.
Well, yeah, that wouldn't have the impact that we think of big blue or
Yes.
orange lights that cover half a block. These were single bulbs with a metal shade above them. And I don't know whether they were 60 watt, 100 watt, I don't know. But
Yeah.
they gave you a little bit of light when you walked under them, where there'd been a fight between the municipal power company and the town council. And so the lights weren't on that night. And some people have thought maybe this was significant and so on. But I've tended to dismiss that because, one, they didn't give very much light anyway. Secondly, those people thought that maybe it was a local arranged murder and they cut the lights to make it easier.
Yeah. Yeah. I can
And
easily. Yeah.
that isn't why the lights were out.
No. Yeah. It was. Yeah. Though there was a much more of a dispute that we won't go into, but
Yeah,
if you look into it enough, you can find actually stuff online about it,
yeah,
in newspaper archives and stuff. That's the first event I wanted to talk about that I did not talk about in that monologue that you heard at the very beginning. I also want to talk about Xenia Delaney event. Or
yes, sure.
so this was a telephone operator at the time. It was around, what was it, 2 a.m. the night of the murder?
2:10,
2:10
2:10
a.m.
a.m. because she woke up and looked at her clock. Actually, let me just give a little lead up.
Yes.
Mike Overman took over that night, and Hank went home, and he was there. He rattled the doors. There wasn't anything unusual downtown. And then sometime after midnight, uh, he went out of the jail, which was downtown, and walked out into this park I was talking about, the town square park with the X
Yes.
paths. And he went back and sat on a bench with under the trees where he could see the whole downtown, but people would not see him sitting in that dark area in the shadows of the trees. And he sat there from sometime after midnight, 1 o'clock at the latest, until 4 or so in the morning. And he didn't see a thing. He did literally not a thing. He said there wasn't a person walked by, there wasn't a wagon or a horse rider, anything. That's gives you some idea that the town had gone to bed and was absolutely quiet. Well, Xenia Delaney was a young woman, 19, I think. Don't hold me to these dates.
Ed, you're completely all right, man. Don't apologize. You're all good.
She was in Rossmore, brother of the murdered man, had a drugstore downtown, and above was a room that was rented to the Mutual Telephone Association. And she was the night operator for them. She came on work at 6 in the morning and left at 7 next morning. So all night she was in that room. She had a clock, and she also had a cot in the room because nobody made telephone calls in those days late. And anything after 10 was an emergency, or you wouldn't call. You'd wait till tomorrow. And so she didn't get any business to speak of. And the company allowed her to rest on the cot. And so she got there through an outside cast iron stairway that came up the outside of the building to the second floor. Probably about 30 steps. It's a big, long stairway. It's currently has been torn down. It was there until a year or two ago, maybe 3 years ago.
You can still see it though on Google Earth.
Yeah,
we did that together previous night.
It's around. It had a loose step, and she was awakened by that step creaking when someone. It's made out of iron, and when they stepped on it, it creaked. So she knew somebody was coming up the steps. And she lay there and she heard the outside door turn. I've gone this route years ago. And there's an outside door, of course, new door probably from what they had.
Yeah.
And she could hear that open. And then she could hear footfalls.
And I want to pause you real quick right here because I knew about this one before I talked to you, but I never realized he got in. So he got in the building on side in a hallway. So he's in a hallway and he goes walking, keep going. I just wanted this.
It was a private apartment when I went through it. It was no longer a telephone exchange, but it had not been changed from the way it was described. But she heard the door open, and she heard footfalls in the hall quietly, she said. And then there are 3 steps from the hall up to this apartment area. It had a banister and all that. And now she's lying there there's a night light on. She's lying on her cot, and she watches the doorknob turn. Now the door was locked, so it didn't let the killer in, but it was tried. And then she heard the steps going back and down. She got up and tried to look out of a south window to see who was on the stairway, but it's too steep and too close to the window. She could not see.
Have you ever just thought, like, if this was the killer? I mean, obviously this could be a rare coincidence. That night of all nights, she's never was awoken, and that's the night she is. And I just want to say for the viewers, this wouldn't be the first time that if we're assuming that this is a serial killer, this wouldn't be the first time that he would try to kill 2 different households in one night. Like, this man got pretty lucky, though. I mean, all things considered, in terms of just never really being seen. I don't know, that story though, I always go back to that, just because that just seems like too big of a coincidence. Especially
if the murderer was a serial killer, and just take the murders that are related to Villisca in most people's minds. If those things were true, then Villisca, and if Villisca was part of that series, I have a suspicion that the killer was not always satiated by the murders he committed and went looking for another victim.
Right. Right. And
But
it's
that's speculation. I don't
it
have
is,
any
and
evidence.
that's the thing that, like, I think it should be pointed out before we get into the crime scene here. Like, as much as we want to know, and as much as people discuss it, you will never know. And
That's right.
you don't want to get too dangerous into the speculation, because that can just lead to stories getting twisted and
Yeah,
stuff
you
like.
see that there's a lot of that in people who I have the advantage of being relatively close to the murder. I mean, I have been to Villisca many times. That was an advantage. Secondly, there are a lot of records about the Villisca murder. But people don't talk about that. They don't realize it. The Iowa State Historical Society has a large Villisca file, and that's available. I mean, it's the people who made the film about it. They went to district court and argued that it had lost control. The county had lost control of it, and it was in private hands. And so they said that we should be able to use it too. And the court ruled that they could. And so the Xenia Delaney story, she was called before the grand jury and asked all these questions. And that's where I got the information. I wasn't there. But I could read what she said under oath about
Yeah.
5 years after it happened.
It must have been pretty scary though for her to recall it, in
Yeah.
but yeah, so that's that. I want to now. This is going to be the juicy part. I wanted as I don't know where that came from, but there's some things in this crime scene that even people that are aware of this case today, that there's some things that are said that aren't true, and I just want to talk about this. Really walk through this crime scene. This is probably going to be the biggest segment of this little talk we have, but discuss each room. So Ross discovers Hank walks through it the first time, and then he calls Cooper to come in with him for the second walkthrough,
Yeah.
so he can correct.
Actually, Hank went up as soon as he went through the house. They locked the door. Hank went up town to get the doctor. He got Cooper, and they came down. I think
Okay.
Cooper had a car. There were a few cars in 1912.
Yes,
Not,
yeah,
it was still a horse-drawn society, but
for
it's
sure. But
changing.
there were
Yeah.
people that were starting to drive. Yeah.
Anyway, uh, Hank has written. He spoke to several grand juries and investigations, and has made several statements about what he saw. But Hank said that he let himself in the west door, which opens into a parlor, and off of the front parlor was a small room that I've heard some say was Catherine's bedroom, that she stayed in that bedroom. I don't know that for sure. Some have said it was a guest bedroom. Some said it was a sewing room with a bed in it. But it did have a bed in it. And Ross had said that he had seen blood on the bedstead in that bed, in that'd be the northwest corner of the house.
And I got a question actually about the bed in this
Yeah.
house. So I've tried to figure this out. Is the bed so the bed right now where it's located in the house, is it the wrong way?
Yes,
Because
it is.
it is. Okay, so it was.
I don't know
Yes.
why, but it is.
I was watching one of your documentaries when you were younger. You went through the house.
That was in a film made about it.
Yes. And
Yeah.
I never knew that. So like the bed is actually, instead of going straight when you enter the room, it's more
Yeah.
toward. Yes. Okay.
Yeah. The door in the room is on the south side, south wall. And when you open that door, that's what Hank did. He went in the front in the parlor. There were no lights. They had no electricity, and they weren't equipped with electricity. And so he struck a match because as he said, the house was dark as night. Some people have said the lamps were burning. There were no lamps burning when the marshal went through. It's possible that somebody lit a lamp later. He was very clear about the house was pitch black. I mean, it was dark because
Mm-hmm.
all of the shades were down completely to the sill, and even the glass in the front parlor door had been covered with a black skirt.
I mean, this was a dude that went out of his way, whoever did this, to just almost like I almost sometimes feel like it was yeah to have privacy, but like it's almost like a ritual, you know, like to
Yeah,
go that in depth of covering even like mirrors that no one
yeah,
looks through, you know, it's very strange
yeah,
behavior.
yeah. In Villisca, the killer spent a lot of time preparing the house so it would be sealed, and we, I assume that was because he stayed in the house for quite some time.
Yeah.
Uh,
Oh man.
uh, anyway, Hank went across there, pushed open the door, and he could see the blood. The bed ran north and south in that room. That now the people who have the house open, they run it east and west, and there was a lyre back dresser on the east wall, and the killer had taken a piece of clothing, a black piece of clothing. There's a picture in the book about it, and had draped it over the mirror. It's a pretty casual drape. He kind of threw it over the mirror.
Looks very. Now I do wonder, Ed. I wonder if someone that walked through that house touched that. Don't you think? Like,
It's very possible.
was it just one mirror, or was it all the mirrors in the house?
I
Do
can't
you?
answer that. I can't. I've heard both.
Okay.
I don't have any clear answer to that. They're claiming now. I think most people that it was the mirror upstairs was also covered.
Yeah.
But that would fit the idea of a ritual action in Victorian times when a corpse lay in the house. You covered all the mirrors. A lot of superstitions related to
Yeah.
mirrors and death and things like that. So I think that the feeling of all the mirrors being closed, that was more symmetrical to that explanation. But I don't remember any of the doctors talking about that mirror upstairs being covered, and they don't talk about I didn't really know for sure whether there was a mirror, but I guess there was a mirror on a dresser upstairs. My own idea about the covered mirror is that the killer didn't. Well, let's get to the bodies first. He pulled back. Hank Harden pulled back the cover, and here were two females. One was obviously a child. She was sleeping on the west side of the bed. She had one eye that was open and had not been damaged. The girl, though, on the east side of the bed, on your right as you walk in the room,
Yeah.
on
Not
she,
the wall side. This is just the open.
yeah,
Oh,
here's the dresser. Here's space between the dresser and the bed. Here's this girl. She was the only person that it looked like for sure that the killer touched. Um, she had been struck in the head. Both of them been struck in the head. In fact, all 8 victims. No blow struck below the neck. Everything was in the head.
with the blunt side of the
Blunt,
axe.
blunt side of the axe, except
Hmm.
for Mrs.
Mrs.
We'll get
Moore.
to that.
We'll
Yep,
get to that. Yeah.
we'll get that in a bit. She was found with her undergarment, bed garment had been removed and had been thrown under the bed, and her nightgown was pulled up above the waist, so she was naked from the waist down. She was about a third of the way down the bed. She wasn't up on the pillow where the little girl was, but had been pulled down. She was lying on her right hip with her left leg brought up over her hip, leaving her genitals exposed.
Right.
And in fact, she was at the very edge of the bed in a kind of a crosswise manner, so that her buttocks was just about, I think Hank said about an inch of it showing uh, under the cover. The cover didn't cover her absolutely completely. There was a lamp at the foot of that bed. with the chimney taken off, and it was under the dresser. It was gold. It was a gold watch on the dresser, which proved to be Joe's watch from upstairs. There was a 4 or 6 inch length of chain. It looks like the killer might have just jerked it and broke the chain. Not an expensive watch, and it was just sitting on the desk.
Oh wow. Okay.
On the
Yeah, no, I forgot about that. I mean, I remember of hearing it, but I just forgot that that's actually was something found was the watch.
Yeah. The axe, which still had blood and hair on it, although it had been wiped, and a piece of clothing thrown under the bed. And then the axe was leaning against the south wall. There's a walk space around the bed, and so it was there. And then wrapped up in a cheesecloth or dish towel, there'd been disagreement about which it was. There was a 4-pound piece of slab bacon.
Yeah, it's probably the most bizarre. I mean, like a.
But then the mirror, at least they reported that the mirror was covered downstairs, and there's a photograph of it being covered. I think what happened was that the killer was sexually obsessed by the girl, and he put her in a position of display. Now, he'd be doing that with the mirror right behind him. And his moving around, I suspect he caught a flash of himself.
Yes.
All houses in those days with no electricity, we're not used to that. There would have been a dim, flickering light, and you'd cast shadows. And so he might have even startled himself by moving and seeing movement. And he didn't want to see movement. Or he didn't want to see himself. I mean, I don't know what his internal emotions feelings were. And so he blotted that out by throwing the mirror over. He also covered the faces of all the victims with a piece of clothing and then pulled the covers over them. So he did blot out the event to some extent. Now, whether he thought that would make it more difficult to find him, or I don't know what, doesn't seem rational. But what seems probably the explanation for that, in my mind, is that he wanted to turn them not into living humans who he had killed, but kind of lumps in the bed that just the cover over them.
What's the theory on the bacon?
The bacon was absolutely confounding to the police and to the public. People saw it. It was so confounding that there was disagreement if there was any bacon at all. But there's no question, all of the doctors that went through, Hank Horton, are absolutely clear that there was as they said it, about a 4-pound piece of slab bacon wrapped up in there. They did disagree. One said cheesecloth, one said dishcloth. Basically, the easiest way to remember that it was wrapped and it was there. They were pretty confident, although it was poor forensics, but they were still pretty confident that it was from a larger piece that was in their pantry. They looked at the bacon in the pantry, and they looked at the bacon that they found at the scene, and they assumed that they came from the same piece that they'd cut.
They were cut, yeah.
The killer had gone in and cut it off. You would have thought that they would have taken it in and laid it down and see, does it fit perfectly? They could have done that. If it came from that thing, it would have been the same size as that slab. But I don't have any record of anybody ever doing that. And they assumed that, well, the one in the bedroom had to come from the pantry. That's where.
Right.
Some people had speculate that the killer brought it with him. He was a tramp on the train, and he was carrying this piece of wrapped bacon because that's all he had to eat. and it seems like there was a kind of a ritual putting it. I mean, it was wrapped up and tied. It but that's one theory. That was a theory that was offered. Some people thought that he was a tramp, and he stole it. He went in and cut it off and wrapped it up and was going to take it with him. But he either thought better of that or he forgot. He got so excited, confused, upset, angry, whatever, that he just walked off and left it. Those two were the only theories that were entertained by anybody. That went on from 1912 until the summer of 1917. And in the summer of 1917, they had arrested a suspect and they were trying to build a case against him. When I say they, I meant the state of Iowa Attorney General was.
Thank you for keeping that name classified, though. I appreciate that. I appreciate you, buddy.
I thought that
we'll get into that next episode, guys.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Well, anyway, this person had a record, and the Iowa Attorney General wrote a letter to a man named Thacker, George Thacker, who was the head of the Oregon Prisoner Aid Society. The Iowa Attorney General knew of him, and he thought he was significant enough to get an opinion about it. And so he wrote a letter in which he described the scene, and he described the suspect and asked this fellow, can you fit these two together? I mean, can you make a case for for this guy being the killer with his personality background and the scene that you find? And the guy wrote back, it's just a one-page letter, handwritten. I've got a copy of it, in which he said that he was supportive of the candidate as the killer.
Yes.
But he said the crucial piece that puts it all together is the bacon. He said that bacon, fat pork, meat, in prisons is often used as a masturbatory aid.
It's wild. Oh man.
And he constructed the scene is that everyone was dead. He undresses this girl, so to speak, displays her, and he stares at her. And that's why he's got the lamp where he does.
Mm-hmm.
Covers the mirror so he doesn't disturb himself or doesn't see himself for whatever reason. And the bacon he rolls into an artificial vagina, which he then uses to masturbate as he looks at her. And that's why he killed everybody, so he could get her to be still and pose for him. He had tried to do that in other situations unsuccessfully, and now he had an opportunity. It was a spur of the moment. He had a reputation as a window peeker, and he was peeking in the window when those children were going to bed. And he just decided if everyone in the house were dead, I could look at her all night if I wanted to.
And I cannot wait to share this person with you guys in episode 2. He was quite the character. Let's just say that. Very interesting man. But
anyway, that's how he explained the bacon. Let me go on upstairs. There's a stairway that leads from the kitchen up. It's an S curve. You start out going towards the west, you turn, go straight up.
Correct. Yep.
Turn west again. So it's got an S curve in it. And that there are no complete rooms, closed rooms upstairs. There are 2 rooms with a partition between them and a closet in that partitioned room. And that's in the south room. We'll get to in a moment. But at the head of the stairs, you get up on the top step, there's a railing, and then Now, I don't know if there's a railing in there those days. I'll bet there was, but I don't know. Uh, there is Joe and Sarah's bed, and it runs east and west, just the reverse of the one downstairs.
Yes, yeah.
Sarah was on the north side of the bed. Joe was on the south side of the bed. They were lying side by side on their backs, basically unmoving. Basically, they were just there. And the killer had struck them both in the head. And there's very strong evidence that he came back a second time.
And I did not mention this. I was going to ask you about this. I did not mention this in my monologue because I didn't know how to describe it.
Yeah, I did not know. In some of the things now, they claim there was a dresser on the south side of that bed. I can't answer that. I can't remember reading in a document that tells me that. In testimony. But they're saying now that there was. And one, I haven't read all the documents. No one ever gets everything. Secondly, I could have forgotten it. I can't remember. But anyway, that was the room. If you go through that room, go south, you come up the steps, turn to your left and go south, you go into where the 4 more children were sleeping. They were all struck in the head. None of them gave any evidence of moving. It looks like they were struck once. Now, it did a lot of damage to the head because their heads were immature.
Yes.
The youngest was 5 years old.
Right. I mean, can't even withstand more than one.
Going back then to the adult room, the killer, pretty confident the killer came back because when the killer struck, blood from Joe ran across the pillow and off the bed, and Sarah's shoes were under the bed, and the blood ran into one of her shoes. It had a lot of blood in the shoe, but when it was found, it was upside down and there was blood on the sole. But and someone said, people went through the house, somebody kicked it over. But the blood had long since coagulated before the house was opened and people got in.
You're right.
So
right.
there was no blood dripping to get on the sole. So that had to happen that night, and the killer knocked it over. The other piece of evidence is that Mrs. was the only one struck in the face.
And I want to talk about this because I don't know if you remember, you listened to obviously my monologue. I sent it to you. I'm a big believer, and I know we've talked about Sarah more. One of my things I would die on a hill on is it doesn't make sense to me. Her where she was struck on her head, it paints the picture that she like shot up in bed. And
could be.
And the way this killer is, if we're suspecting this is an experienced killer, I almost envision it. He's using the blunt part. She's sparks up. He's kind of like, okay, we need to just for sure. She flips the axe, bam, knocks her on the top side because wasn't her like describe her in particular because I think she woke up.
I think you make a very strong case that she might have even sat up in bed. Several people speculated at the time, people who went through the house, some doctors, that perhaps she had awakened. And the reason they said that they gave was that she had scooted over against her husband and her head was found against his shoulder, like she might have sat up. And they thought that she went that way. What you're saying, and I can see the argument that you strike the victim and, they sat up and you struck them and they fell back and then you got worried and you hit them to make sure they were dead. But the evidence that the killer left and then came back is also supported by that because the killer hit her just above the chin and proceeded to strike up across the face to the forehead, into the forehead,
Mm-hmm.
and so that as one doctor put it, her face was reduced to approximately 1 inch slices. And one of the reasons that people didn't really comment on that, apparently, is that she apparently looked fairly normal when left alone, because the face stayed together, so to speak. But
Mm-hmm.
you could open it like an accordion if
Isn't that
you
wild? I mean,
tried
that's
to.
just
It's a terrible thing. Uh, but the key factor was that there was no blood in those cuts. That's another reason why people didn't notice it, because they didn't bleed. That suggests that she was already dead and the heart was no longer
and
functioning.
and have you
The
ever
blood
thought,
had
Ed?
drained out.
And that's I think she's the I don't know, the more I study this case, I just always go back to Sarah Moore. I think it shows a lot about this killer because if we look at it from a point of she awoke and they're like pretty much so documentation states they're like 1 inch cuts. And it's very it's almost like precise. It's almost like this killer went back to like it sounds messed up and I hate saying it almost like to like make a piece of,
Mhm.
put a little like a creativity in his work. I don't know, like how are I I don't know, like it's like a
Sure.
somebody like a movie that Halloween, Michael Myers, he does stuff with
Yeah.
his victims after he, I
Yeah.
know it's a horror
Yeah.
movie, but almost like the 1 inch cuts, I feel like that's almost has to be like intentional if none are like overlapping and they're almost like perfectly.
Well, it definitely was intentional, because Joe, everything from Joe, from the chin up, was gone. I mean, he just had the skull, the back of the skull was still lying on the pillow, but everything else was blown away. The killer had struck him repeatedly, and at least one doctor speculated that maybe the killer just turned the axe on its side and hit him with the flat of the axe and just mashed the
Oh
whole
wow,
area
yeah,
in. So the two key factors, I think, I'm no forensic scientist.
I know, yeah, yeah,
Never
you
studied it, but I know that scene intimately, and the two factors that are somewhat in conflict, it seems to me like, if you look at the room downstairs, you have a very strong case that the killer was sexually motivated. He was a voyeur. He
mm-hmm.
wanted to look at the person, and he killed everybody so that he could do that. And that, of course, fits one of the suspects.
Yes,
But if you go upstairs, it looks like a rage murder. The children
it's
were
so
killed.
interesting, yeah.
The children were killed in a kind of a humane way. I mean, whack. They never knew what hit them. They didn't show any signs. They weren't even disheveled in the bed, and they weren't moved. Some people thought they ran around and the killer chased them and imagined that. And
I
there
always
were,
like your point though. It is so true how children can sleep through anything. Like
yeah,
the big
yeah, they
case
did.
is how did no one wake up, and
Yeah. Well, the parents in that room were dead before the children were killed. I'm sure, because the parents would have
yeah,
awakened.
absolutely.
But he got to the top of the stairs. It's two quick blows, and then he's in with the kids and so on. But in the parents' room, the killer just was enraged. I mean, he just destroyed their those the two adults,
Yes.
and that seems to be a different motivation than you're seeing in the bedroom downstairs. And
Yes.
I can't resolve that. Maybe someone who is an expert in these kind of things would, oh, that's common, that
It
a person strikes out, and it's a rage murder, but they also like little girls. And I don't know if that's true or not.
I wanted to talk about the attic
Oh,
because
yeah.
this is
Yeah.
the most it almost drives me crazy based on what I know about how this attic was this house was so small. And I highly advise any listener to go look at this house on YouTube or just like a walkthrough. There's walkthroughs with no sound. Just walking through the house. This was a small farmhouse, and clothes were hung on the railings of this staircase leading up to this upper
That's
floor,
right.
just to preserve. And this attic was holding storage. And there's this huge theory that's still being, I think, tossed around just to make it seem even like a more scary story that this killer was in the attic and there were cigarette butts found. Where did this all come from, and how did it just kind of materialize into something people believe?
Yeah, it was a rumor from the very beginning. Within a day or two of the murder, people were speculating because most of the people had trouble understanding how could a killer come in the house, move around the house, kill these people, and nobody woke up. Maybe misses, but it's debatable.
Yeah.
And the nobody getting out of bed is pretty clear because of the disposition of the blood. There's a lot of blood and brain tissue and all of this, but it was all concentrated at the heads of the bed, on the pillows, or on the bedstead or the wall
Hmm.
behind the bed. If you get in that room, there is a attic that runs. It's a gabled house, comes up and a flat on top and gable.
Almost like a big
And,
closet in a way, because it's like a
yeah,
door. There's a little door,
there's a
folding
little
door.
door you have to stoop to get in,
Hmm.
and that room, the joists that support the roof and all, they run out to the sidewalls and are tied together like any house. And then they have planked over a section of that, maybe 4 or 5 feet. So um, people started to speculate, and one of the people who was very vocal about this was a woman named Minnie Moore. Minnie's a sister to
Oh,
Joe.
Joe. Okay.
She worked in Omaha in a store. She was a clerk or something in a department store in Omaha, and she rushed to Villisca. It's probably an hour by train, and got there the first day. The murder had just been discovered. It's probably in the afternoon sometime. I don't know when she got there, and she was speculating that maybe the killer had come to the house, got in the house during church when everyone was gone, and hid in that attic, and then came out. So he was right in Joe and Sarah's bedroom, and so it was a didn't there were no stairs to climb, no noise to
Less noise
make,
can made, yeah.
yeah, and just boomed right out. Well, there was a reporter there, a man named Hoban, Hoban. Hoban was a reporter for the Kansas City Post. That reporter picked up that story and, in my judgment, embellished it. And he said that there were two things. In that closet, there was a box of ticking, cotton ticking, and it was all scooped out. Someone had been sitting on it or crouching on it, and their weight had mashed it down so the box was concave like that.
Yes.
And there was smoking material in the uh, closet. Now, that could have been a pipe or pipe dustings. It could have been a cigar, could have been matches. And some people believed that and assumed that was kind of true, and others didn't. But the detective who followed the case, it was to his advantage to use that. So he built up that closet story. But none of the doctors, they looked the house over, and then I think all of them said, I went into that closet or I looked into that closet. They didn't report any smoking material at all. But one of the undertakers had picked up that story, and he wanted to find out himself. So he went into the closet and he said there was there could also have been tobacco juice because a lot of people chewed tobacco in
Yeah.
those days,
Okay.
and they spit because it stimulates the saliva glands. And
Yes,
you got a
absolutely.
mouthful of tobacco juice, you don't want to swallow it, makes you sick.
Yeah.
So you spit it out. And he said there wasn't any evidence of smoking in that closet. And the ticking, the box of ticking, he found that. And he said, but it was sitting on two suit boxes. Now, a suit box is a box about 5 inches high, maybe six, and it's made out of a very light cardboard. And you fold up a suit when you buy it from a clothing store, and it'll have trouser and the coat all folded together in that box. And you couldn't put your hand and push on it; it just crush. It's too light. Anything that would cause that cardboard box to bow would have crushed those suit boxes
Yeah, it
flat.
wouldn't take much at all.
No,
I'm sure.
no.
No.
So
That's
I
what
have
sold
never.
me that it's like, I don't know. I just feel like that's
Yeah,
that's somebody trying to get a promotion, because
yeah.
they've thrived on having successful papers, right? Writers and
Well, yeah,
reporters.
well, all of them did it. I mean, it was unethical, but all of them did it. The reporter from Des Moines Register became a very famous reporter in Des Moines Register, and he came out with a story the second or third day that there were burned documents in
Mm,
the
I've heard
kitchen
about this.
stove,
Yeah.
and that just disappeared. It came out. There were talk about what do the documents mean, could they decipher them, and all of that, and then nothing else was heard of it. And I think both those reporters were confronted with a deadline. They had to get either a telegraph or a phone call into the paper to meet the deadline, and nothing new had happened in the case, really. And so what happens? Well, they take something they might have heard, thought might have happened, and created a story around it so they would have something to send in. That's what
Interesting. I wanted
I
to say one more. So the chances are that this killer, whoever did this, there's two different things that I think of. It's he just walked in. One, I think that could be very likely. He takes a lamp on the counter in the kitchen, a kerosene lamp, lights it, bends the wick, does his thing, goes up the stairs, puts the lamp down, and that's how I envision he probably got in. But the other theory that I think it wasn't there, so there was a barn outside and there was like an indentation with a knothole. That's
Sure.
another thing that gets thrown around. That I mean, but I've
Yeah.
always that could be the children that were maybe playing. Kids are playing. They're It's like a
Yeah.
hiding spot.
There was an indentation. There was hay in the mow of that barn, a small barn. Lots and lots of people in those days had a little barn in the back of their lot and kept a horse and a carriage, maybe a cow. The Moors did. It faced the house. It's a pretty deep lot, so it's probably 100 feet or more back to that
And
barn.
this barn. By the way, viewers, this barn is no longer. It's completely new.
No,
Yeah.
no, the thing that they built a new building there, but
Yes.
it's not related to the barn that was there. Um, and upstairs you have the barn. It was a standard barn, only small size, and there'll be a stairway, generally just boards and tacked on, or
Yeah.
you climb up it,
A ladder.
and
Yeah.
then there's it's a ladder stairway, and
Hmm.
then you would have a second floor, and the second floor would have a large opening like shutters. So there was hay in that place. It wasn't a lot of hay, but there was a pile of hay that was at that opening. And there was a knothole in the south wall on the second floor that uh, in front of that, it was pretty obvious that somebody had been lying down in that hay. Nobody measured whether it was an adult size or a child size. My personal suspicion, don't have any evidence, no testimony or anything, but my suspicion was that we all know about young kids, these from 5 to 12, kids of
Yeah.
that age, grade school kids, playing, imagining I got a fort or imagining it's a,
Exact. Yeah. I can easily
you
see that
know,
view. Yeah.
they're defending it. In fact, I can remember a little older than that, junior high age, maybe high school. I think it was junior high. We had a barn just very much like that, not in our house, but kid of mine, a friend that I played with, and we had BB guns.
Oh
And
yeah, just perfect.
There were 4 or 5 of us. Two. It seems to me that was 2 against 3. 2 got in the upper barn, and the other 3 attacked. And we shot at each other with those BB
Oh
guns.
yeah, I mean, that's
And,
what always made me question. I mean, that's something I would do. It's like it does seem like a
yeah,
perfect spot for kids to
yeah.
play.
And I think that there was a hole in the barn, and I think there was a depression in the hay, and I think it was one of the kids, or 2 of the kids, or some of the kids, lying there looking through the knothole, watching what was going on, or
Yeah,
just playing a fantasy game. The reason I say that, the people who believe that argue that the killer cased the joint. He wanted, so he got there early. I mean, who knows when he got there, and he hid in that barn to see, was this the house I want to attack? That seems to me to be, I think there's a lot of suggestion that it was an impulse murder.
exactly.
That
Yes,
the killer may have been searching for a
and it
house.
doesn't fit the memo of if we believe that this is a linked crime. It doesn't really fit the memo of everything of the other
No,
murders.
certainly not the man from the train, who seemed to try to move fast and get in and get out fast.
Yeah,
Uh, and it doesn't fit the community. If he came in on the train, it's 8. I've measured it. I mean, I've driven. It's 8 blocks from the closest point on the railroad to the house. That takes you through a pretty long residential area. You pass several houses. The idea that he came in the day before, or he came in even the afternoon of, something like that, that's hard to believe,
yeah.
because there are 1,000 eyes on the street in a town like that. And it's not that they're suspicious, they're just, everyone's right there. And
And it makes sense. Yeah, it makes sense.
if anyone new is in town, they know each other. I mean, I was, as a high schooler, we knew that there was an old car in a garage down the street, other part of town, a friend and I, and we knew it was a very old car, and we wanted to see it. And one night we got our courage up and said, let's sneak in that garage and look at that car. And the poor lady who owned the garage and the car, she had written on the outside, "Stay out or find," FIND.
Oh my gosh, that's actually funny.
And so we jimmied the lock. It wasn't a padlock or anything. We stuck a thing in and got a hold of the lever and pulled it open and got in. And it's one of these old car, nice car, probably a 1920. All of a sudden, she caught us. She came and I'd never seen the woman. I don't think. And she read the riot act and looked me right in the eye and said, "You're Ed Epperly's boy, aren't you?" I mean, she knew me, but
Yeah.
I didn't know her at all. That's the nature of those kinds of towns.
Yeah. It's
It's
small town.
It's hard to sneak around.
Well, I mean, but it's one of those things too. It's like, even if he was like, it's a very interesting where the Morehouse is. It really seems inconvenient that that's the house that, if it is a serial, that's the house he chose.
I think, personally, if it's that kind of a killer, if it's a serial killer, I think he felt that he was being guided. I mean, God's hand, or the devil, or some exterior force that he either thought he understood or didn't understand, but he knew it was. And so he was looking for a sign. And I have no idea what that is, what that would be. It might be, to give you an example of what I meant, it might be a weapon. See, the killer never brought a weapon with him.
Always of opportunity. Always
Yeah,
looking
it's
for
a
a weapon.
weapon of
Yeah.
opportunity, and maybe that's what gave him the sign. If he their axe was in the backyard and would be visible from the street or things like that, it might have been some kind of evidence that there was a child there. He might have been interested in killing a child, and I don't know what that would be either. But there might be something in the yard that tipped him off, that caused him to know this is the house.
Right.
It might have been just the fact that the house seemed absolutely deserted as it was from 7 o'clock until
Yeah.
we got home at 10. But probably it could have been that there was no light on in the house and anywhere. And he came in at 12 o'clock, got off the train at 12, and he got there at 10 after. And he'd been looking, and here he finally found the weapon. House was dark, and that's all he needed. He went
That's the
in.
sign. Yeah. It's crazy, and like I said, it's all speculation, but and now I want to get to the final bit here. We have a man named M.W. McClory, fingerprint expert from Kansas City, Leavenworth, Kansas, right? Now this guy, was that correct?
I think it's pronounced McLaughlin.
Okay.
I think.
Gotcha. So yeah, this dude was, I mean, every time I read this story, I am the fact that we're not going to get into the story of why there's no crime scene photos, but this man was pretty much, I look at this man as very thankful that this man, he was a very smart man. He sounded like,
He was.
the closest thing you can get to with what they were working with in the time period with very
He,
experienced.
yes. He was an assistant warden at the federal penitentiary in Leavenworth, Kansas. And they called him the day of the murder, and he came by train the next day. Unfortunately, he was drunk when he got there.
I wanted to add that in my monologue so bad, but I'm like, nah, it's just too much I can't because that's just a
He could hardly get off the train the way I reconstruct it. He had to be helped, and they took him out to the Stillinger house to talk to the Stillingers, but he was too drunk to get out of the car. And
oh,
so,
this guy
and
was
so,
blasted, man.
and so, yeah, he was. And so they took him to a downtown hotel, and uh, he spent about 6 hours drinking coffee and getting
Sobered up.
fully.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And he did finally, though, do the only forensic examination of the scene. Now, the bodies had been removed. Nothing else. The house had not been cleaned. But anyway, McLaughlin got there, and when he was sober, he went down, and he looked for fingerprints. Well, anyway, he came in and he looked for fingerprints and could not find any. I think that's because their system was much cruder. What they really looked for was like a blood fingerprint on a hard surface or on a glass surface, and
Okay.
they could photograph that. So he couldn't find any of those clear fingerprints, but he made a meticulous analysis of the scene, particularly of the blood spots.
Hmm.
And he's the one that found that there were in the south room upstairs. There
An
were
act.
cuts. There were cuts in the ceiling where the killer had swung the axe and struck the ceiling, and there was blood on the axe, and it flew off of the axe across the room a ways. It was going north into a closet where the door was open, and not a lot, a blood spot or two had gone all the way into that closet and was on the back wall of that closet. He found that. And then he measured, well, here's the cut. And from the way it's curved on the ceiling, that the killer was left-handed.
Hmm.
Now, that's what it's based on, was the way he saw the cuts in the ceiling, that it came in with a left-handed swing, not a right-handed swing. And so The second element of that was the beds were all around the outside of the room, but the cut in the ceiling was in the center of the room. And he experimented with the axe, I'm sure, which he had. And if you hit the ceiling, you would not hit any bed. There was no way you could hit a bed. You were separated from it. He also, in that south room, didn't think that the killer would have reached the ceiling. If you were swinging an axe, that's something I've done, by the way. If you're swinging an axe, you think of the axe as being 3 feet long.
Yeah.
And your arms are 2 feet long. And so you have this vision of you swinging it like this.
Yeah. And that's like.
But in reality, you generally swing it, your hands are below your shoulder and you bring it over. So it's
Correct.
It's maybe that high. Maybe it's that high above your head, 2 feet above your head. And he didn't think it would hit the ceiling. What he thought was that the killer was holding the axe in his left hand. And maybe he was holding a lamp, maybe not, but he was holding the axe in his left hand. And he was swinging it, as he put it, in a frenzy of excitement.
And that's just, when every time I hear it, it's just such a chilling, like.
Yeah. And now, if you believe it was rage motivated killer, his excitement was he was going to get to go back and now smash these people into complete oblivion because he had everybody killed. Nobody's going to wake up and run out the front door and then he's going to be chased by dogs and caught. He now was excited. If he was the killer who wanted to look at this girl to his satisfaction, he can't now. He's ready. He's killed the children last. Everyone else is dead now. There's no more rooms, and I'm home free.
Right.
So that's the way I interpret it. In the other room, there were also cuts in the ceiling upstairs, Joe and Sarah's. And those looked like they were made by the butt of the axe when he brought it back from striking the victim. They might have been caused when he was striking the mother in the face, blade first and then the butt.
And this will make way. This just it makes so much sense when you see this house, how it is, and that makes sense. That could potentially be for sure. But yeah, that was
anyway. That was he knew that had been done then, the cuts in the ceiling, because there was powder, plaster dust was lying on the beds where he had hit the ceiling. So, I mean, that's the scene that we got to work with.
Yep, and that's I mean, it was a really thank you for coming on. And you the final question I think I have, this is it, is like to conclude, like why is Villisca, and outside of like how it's become like a paranormal spot, people of interest, even if you exclude that, why do you think the Villisca crime, if we assume that it was a linked case with other murders that were happening, why do you think this is the one that is remembered the most and is often looked at? People know of it that aren't even.
Well, I get asked that question quite a bit. Why do we remember Villisca? And that's really true too. Now, it's not so true now because partly Villisca has gotten a lot of publicity in the last 30 years.
Yes,
it's really changed. It was not as well known when I got started, but I'm not saying that I made a contribution, but lots of things happened.
No, I get I get you.
I got plenty to think about that. That sounds kind of.
No.
I had a contribution, but what happened in Villisca was that the town, like all of the towns, was just completely devastated and angered. There was a great cry for justice. These children were killed. Someone has got to pay for this horrible thing. This is beyond all imagination that anything like this could happen in a town like this. where we don't even lock our doors. No, we haven't had a serious violent crime in years, and the last one we had was a case where a husband killed a wife in a domestic quarrel. So the town was just completely devastated. And that was true in the other towns when those murders occurred. But the people in Villisca was a very popular, well-known couple. The father of the murdered woman, Sarah, was a wealthy farmer, relatively wealthy farmer.
Yeah, yeah. For the
And Joe's family had been there. Joe's father had fought in the Civil War along with his three brothers, one of whom had been killed, and in the Civil War, and the Moore family was known and respected. They were on the way up. Joe was a young 43 years old entrepreneur, and was developing an implement dealership and hardware store. So you had all of that. They were active in the church. They were active in the social groups of the town, and then the children. So in their frantic effort to catch the killer, they first thought it was a serial killer moving from town to town, and they didn't catch him, and they kind of threw up their hands in despair, because how would they ever catch him? But anyway, without that kind of evidence, what do they do? And they turn to a local person who shall remain anonymous at this time.
Yes, sir.
That person, he had motives for being angry at Joe, but this stretch of saying he would hire a murderer to kill all of the family, and inadvertently the two visitors, never rang true to anybody who wasn't just desperate to solve the crime, to get justice. And then there was a detective that got involved in that, and he exaggerated that position. And so a whole series of trials developed, and there was a slander suit and 2 trials for murder and several little trials, suits, and little spin-off things that got solved pretty quickly. There was an adultery trial that happened, and so on. That kept it boiling on the top burner for over a decade.
Yes.
The last trial was, I think, in 21, maybe it's 22. And then it had been such a case, it was such an important cold case, that the Des Moines Register ran a big feature article about every 20 years at least. In 1930, they ran a 3 sequence feature on the murder, rehashed the whole murder. And consequently, in 1945, they ran a big feature article. About 1987, they ran a feature article.
So they've been, they've kept.
It's a kind of thing that after a number of years, somebody's sitting around, what in the hell am I going to write about? I got to write a feature.
And yeah,
boom, it comes up.
And I do think,
more.
And I do think it helps. And this is just going to hint towards the night. There is one person that we spoke of that we talked about with the bacon who was being tried. I think he's probably the only one in like any of the cases where he actually makes a really good argument for at least for being involved in Villisca.
He would have been convicted, in my judgment, and I think anybody who looks at the evidence and doesn't know anything else would have, like a jury, would have convicted him. As the prosecuting lawyer, who would be expected to say, men have been hung on a lot less evidence than this.
Yes,
very true. You'll get into that some other time. But he wasn't convicted because the feelings in the community were so convinced that it was this local suspect, that even though there was
little to
debunked.
no
The only evidence
that was
against him
and it was debunked.
was debunked. They still believed he did it, and the other suspect is being framed, and so they wouldn't accept what they like. Somebody, I heard someone say I can't find the quote. Damn, I
Oh, you're
misplaced it somewhere. Oh my feet of clay. Oh, I put it somewhere, but I heard someone say that they wouldn't convict this fellow if Christ himself testified against him. You know,
yeah.
and everyone that was a very well, it was a kind of a colloquial statement, but it was a very strong statement.
Yes.
And I think he was right. It didn't matter what was said on the witness stand; they were convinced in advance that he was not the murderer, and they weren't going to railroad him to the hangman's noose. So anyway, that's where it stood.
I mean, that's pretty much it, Ed. I want to thank you one more time for joining the show. Like I said, you've been amazing. I've talked to you many times, and maybe, depending on how this show goes in the long run, I'm already garnering some attention. A lot of people have been supportive on this Villisca blog I've been on, saying that they're going to tune in. Like, if I grow a little following, I would love, a live Q&A one day, down the line, if you would be interested. I know that sounds like a really cool idea.
Sure, we can talk. We'll talk about that and see if we can get that.
I just grow a little audience first, and I appreciate you for coming on. And yeah, we'll just have to stay tuned for the next episode where we'll bring somebody else on. But we got a couple suspects to talk about. See you in episode 2, and enjoy the bloopers that are actually coming on. See you in episode 2. If you enjoyed this first episode and are looking forward to episode 2, make sure to leave a follow and even drop a comment on whatever platform you're listening on. And like I said, what is a podcast without bloopers? Enjoy these outtakes of the monologue to lighten the mood. Josiah owned his own implement business, the J.B. Moore Implement Company, which made them more unable to stomach what he had seen. Ed Sully fled the house, leaving a Horton Marshall. Oh my God. Both Josiah and Sarah showed no signs of struggle, leading investigators to believe that they had been murdered in their sleep, never even waking before the final blow fell. Oh, Joe and Sarah Moore lay side by side in bed, their bodies undisturbed. And in the small bed across the room, assess rigor mortis, concluding that they had been dead for approximately I can't say it right. This detail, along with her body's unnatural position, led early investigators to suspect inflicted that night. The two men met. It's hard. This is hard. Having already determined the estimated time of death from his assessment of the Stillinger sisters, he refrained from disturbing. As he stepped onto the front porch, he was met with the sight of an Boys, my God, boys, don't come in here. You will regret it for the longest day you ever lead. Yeah, my voice acting skills are trash. Before we move on into the final part of this monologue leading into our discussion, it's crucial to understand. Okay, so before we move on into the final part of this monologue leading into our discussion, it's crucial to understand. I cannot say it. Though his search yielded nothing usable, he conducted the most thorough forensic analysis of the house, drawing several. Instead, McClaughry theorized that the blood had sprayed from the axe as the quiller. The Villisca axe murders remain the most infamous case among this string of Midwest axe killings, and because of that, we will dedicate one more episode to this case. Before stepping back even farther in time to the earliest known murder linked to this